Hello, I'm Olivia, and today we're talking about banishing. As I kind of figured after my vlog with my friend Annie, who had purchased this gorgeous antique table, but unfortunately had an entity that hitched a ride into her home using the table, I went out and helped her banish it and kind of evict it from the place that it wasn't welcome. And a lot of people had a lot of questions, and I am happy to provide resources. Today, I'm just drinking regular coffee, nothing super interesting, unfortunately. But grab yourself a drink, hang out, grab a notebook, and let's get started. So the way that I'm going to lay out this video is why you would banish or what you would banish. The second section is going to be talking about different herbs and little rituals or items, tools, mixtures, etc. on how you can banish. Use a level system, anywhere from level 1, which would be just unwanted energy, up to level 10, which would be dangerous and stubborn entities. Then we're going to move on to the section of my book recommendations, a couple of books that have good tactics and information and rituals on banishing. And then the last piece of this video is going to be a Q&A from my Patreons. They had a lot of questions on banishing, so we're going to go through those and answer for them. And then hopefully by the end of this video, you will feel like you have a little more information and a little more confidence under your belt for banishing in your practice. And then I will send you on your way to put it to use. So let's get started. The first thing first is, why would you use banishing? What's it for? Banishing is essentially just telling something to go away and never come back. The most common form is banishing negative energy, which a lot of the time we just call cleansing, because you can just banish energy. Cleansing and banishing energy would be, I would argue, is the same thing. And speaking to some other witchy friends of mine, they also kind of agree. Cleansing and banishing are kind of in this Venn diagram, where cleansing is more of, mundanely would be equivalent to cleaning an object, just cleaning it off, getting the dust off, and making sure that it's no longer sticky, or you can see through the mirror that you're wiping off, something like that. Whereas banishing starts in that area, but as it moves more towards full-blown banishing, it works more towards entities. So you don't really cleanse out an entity, you banish an entity. And talking to a couple of other practitioners, they agree. So if you disagree, I'd like to know why and what you would kind of classify those two things as. But that is how I've always seen it. That is how I've always been taught. So that's my information. Another really popular practice in banishing is banishing people. While I highly recommend that you would do a lot of soul searching and reflecting and trying to be sure that you're being emotionally intelligent about the situation, I would pair it with a cord cutting if you really want to go the magical route. Fairly often you'll see spells to banish a terrible neighbor or a mean neighbor, or to banish a obsessive ex, to banish an awful abuser of some sort. So there's a lot of different reasons on why you would want to banish. And the last thing is banishing entities, which is the one thing that I think a lot of people have the most questions on. I'm not going to go super deep into this because this all just depends on what you believe. So I'm going to let you know the things that I've learned and things I've heard about. If you disagree, that's totally fine. There are the spirits of the dead, people who have passed. There are spirits just in general, whether that's land spirits or just kind of wandering spirits that were never living people, but they are active spirits. And then there are the other entities that are in the miscellaneous that most of the time you won't really come into contact unless you really reach out to them, or for some reason somebody sends them to you. And the probability of that is very low, so don't get too worried about that. People choose to deal with these separations of spirits differently sometimes, because some people just don't want spirits in the house. Unless they are part of their spiritual team, they just don't want spirits in the house, which is totally fair. And if there are spirits of the dead who that practitioner doesn't know, most of the time they will be sent away. Whereas I personally don't really mind. If you want to come by, as long as you're not causing any issues, as long as you're not causing me any grief or my family any grief, you are more than welcome to just pass through. There are the other entities who are irritating. They might just be looking for attention or somewhere to gather energy from. And that's where I'm kind of like, no, you're not allowed here. This is my space, and I'm not willing to give you anything. Most entities, most spirits, I really don't have an issue with. It's kind of like people. Most people that you meet really aren't bad. They're not They're not going to cause you any issues purposely, and most of the time, unless you go out of your way to do something, or maybe you accidentally do something to piss off a spirit, they're really not going to pay you any mind. Whereas there are other ones who are a little more attention seeking. There are others that like to feed off of energy that are not theirs, and that's rude. So I also don't allow them in my space or around me. And then there are the other entities that are very rare and are highly dangerous. So when you get to that point, when you are actually in harm's way when it comes to an entity, that's when I would suggest getting a professional practitioner, because trying to deal with something like that on your own, really recommend getting a professional practitioner. Now, it's very uncommon. That is so uncommon. So don't feel like you always need to be super on edge. Most of the time, you won't be dealing with the far end of the more dangerous entities. So I just want you to be aware the probability is very low. So we're mainly going to be working with from banishing energy, people, and entities. It's mainly going to be around the entity, everything can go smoothly and safely. We're just going to kind of push that to the side. Into our next section, I'm going to be talking about different herbs, different rituals, different tactics, different tools. I'm going to be working on a scale from level 1 to level 10. Level 1 being just negative or unwanted energy, and level 10 being those dangerous entities. We're going to be probably staying away from anything around 8 to 10 because, again, I would rather have you get a professional. So, banishing. Let's talk about banishing herbs. Pull out my notes here. Super simple, level 1 to level 2. We've got cinnamon, rosemary, and lavender. These are used fairly often, and you can just burn them. You can use them in sprays or washes or powders or however else you like to use herbs. And these are, again, just more of the energy type of clearing. Level 2, level 3 would be orange or lemon peels, cedar and juniper. Those two are some of my favorite, and I use them all the time. This is more of a gentle way of pushing things out, but they are a little more pushy than the previous herbs mentioned. Now, these next herbs are anything from level 4 to, they could be up to level 7 depending on how you're utilizing them. So if you add them in with some kind of prayer or any other ritual, you could push this potency up to level 7. So we have herbs like mullein, hyssop, nettles, dragon's blood, clove, and guava leaves. I personally love guava leaves. They smell awful when you burn them, but they work really well. Guava leaves are a big thing in Filipino folk practices. They were used for hex breaking and banishing, and they are a good kick in the ass for anything that you're trying to get out. So most of the time I personally will use those, but if you're not connected to it, it's totally fine. There are plenty of other herbs on here that you can pick out and try out. I love clove as well. It just smells good too. Clove and dragon's blood is a little more interesting. Clove, I would argue, that has that energy of, it is a push out, but it's a little more defensive as well. Of once it's pushed out, it's also kind of got like these spikes up. So if it tries to come back, clove is a little bit more aggressive, and so is dragon's blood. So when you use that for banishing, it's also very protective. I asked a couple of my friends to give me some of their banishing tactics, and I'm going to give you some of them. So this is from Marshall, the Witch of Southern Light. He gave me his banishing spray, and I really love this one because it's a really good alternative if you can't burn anything or if you have pets. So you want to make sure that you're using things that aren't going to be harmful for the pets, especially if you're spraying something around and you don't want that to affect your furry friends. It's only 3 different ingredients. The base is dark moon water. So you would have some distilled water and you would leave it out on the dark moon and then take it out before it hits the sun, and then just use that in a spray bottle. And then clove and dragon's blood resin. Just shake that up, spray it around, and he feels that it is around a level 4, level 5. If you charge the ingredients as well, I'm sure it can have quite a big kick. Another one that Marshall gave me, which was a really great one, is protection herbs wrapped with your hair. He personally used pine and rosemary, and then a small piece of hair woven into those herbs and hung somewhere as an offering to give to the herbs as they protect your home. That's some old style witchcraft right there. Then I have a banishing oil from Temperance Alden from Wild Woman Witchcraft. She put this at a level 7 to a level 8. You would add wisteria, bay, and hyacinth, and technically it's an uncrossing oil, but adding a little bit of hyssop would make it a really good banishing oil. that is another one that I am going to have to try out myself. Georgina from Dot Darling says that she uses the Star Ruby every day and says that it works really well for banishing in her space. I'll leave a video on how to do that, a tutorial. My personal way is I like to work with my ancestors. I've got my spiritual team. If there's anything that comes in to my space that I don't think should be there, they're pretty good at standing at the doorway and going, mm-mm. Mm-mm. A lot of folk traditions bang pots and pans, and you can use just loud noises, loud music, or bells ringing. That, I would argue, would probably get up to maybe a level 4. Further, if you like to work with spirits and you're comfortable with that, then I would call upon the local land spirits. The land spirits, it's their home, it's their space. So of course, if there's anything that is coming in and maybe they don't like and you don't like, it's really easy to work with them and give them offerings and ask them if they would aid you in banishing whatever entity that is not welcome there. Another thing is working with any deities that you may work with. You'll see that in a lot of these resources, and especially in Jason Miller's books, he gives you really good information on how to work with specifically Hecate. But see if you could alter some of those rituals that he has in his book to better fit whatever deity that you work with. Let's move into the books. There is the ritual. So like I said, the Star Ruby, you'll see this ritual and it is I-A-O. It's using the sounds that you produce, E-A-O. You'll see this specific ritual in the Witch's Shield, Psychic Witch, and Protection and Reversal Magic. So let's open these books. I believe I've done a review on all of these books, so I'll link those below if you're interested. But the first one is Psychic Witch that has the E-A-O ritual. He walks you through that and has a couple of different pretty simple banishing rituals in here. The next one is the Witch's Shield. This one also has the E-A-O. I don't know if it's called something else. I'm not a ceremonialist. The E-A-O ritual. So there's that one. And then finally, you can see that I've marked up the shit out of this book, the Protection and Reversal Magic. This one is also a really good one. So like I said, this also has the ritual with E-A-O. It also has a really good ritual that is calling in the guardians. You are summoning an actual entity to basically act like a bouncer. He talks about what he uses and the guardians that he personally uses. He also gives you the option and the freedom within that ritual to add in whatever guardians or entities that you feel more comfortable with working. So that is the main piece. I'm going to go over to the Patreon questions so that we can answer some of the questions that they left for us. Oh, we have a lot of questions. Love it. All right, let's see. Do you have to know what exactly you're trying to banish before performing a banishing? It's a really good question. I think you should at least put it under the umbrella of what you're banishing, just because you kind of have to figure out what your skill set is and where you feel this entity is. I really believe that most of the time it's going to be something you can handle. The second question is, how do you know whether a banishing worked, especially if you're not super in tune with spirits and energies? Ooh, I think being in tune with specifically energies is a really important thing to work on, especially if you're going to be a practitioner, because that's like the base of what you're doing, right? So working on that and strengthening that skill is going to be really important. How do you know banishing worked? First off, what are the symptoms that you're trying to get rid of? So say I need to do banishing because I have this problematic spirit that keeps knocking on my doors and draining energy from maybe me, whispering in my roommate's ears, or moving things around. I want to get rid of those symptoms, right? So after I perform the banishing, if I'm not super in tune with energies, I suppose I would just kind of wait and see if any of the symptoms went away or got better. But again, I do think that learning to become in tune with spirits, learning to become in tune with energies is going to be a huge piece of your practice, because that's kind of what practicing is. And you know, some might be stubborn. Sometimes you might have to kick them out multiple times, and that's annoying, but you know, some spirits are just annoying. All right, next question. I'm still new to the craft, so I have a ton of questions. How do you know you need to banish something? How do you make sure you banish the right thing? How does a banishing work different than other workings? what does it feel like during the banishment, and how do you know it was successful, and what tools and materials can be helpful? Oh, you got a lot of questions. I love it. I'm here for it. Okay, so first question, how do you know you need to banish something? Again, like I said in the beginning, it just depends on what you're comfortable with. I know some practitioners that are only my spiritual team, only my deities, only my spirits, only my ancestors are allowed, nobody else. Whereas I'm a little more relaxed as long as you are not ill intended, you are not sent here for ill reasons or ill intentions, and you're not causing any problems. I don't really mind. You are free to come and go as you will, but if you are causing problems, then I'll personally take that step and be like, yeah, you need to get the fuck out of here. So that's kind of up to a personal comfortability level. How do you make sure you banish the right thing? That is such a good question. Banishing the correct thing boils down to understanding how and where to direct the energy, and I assume that comes pretty naturally. Because if there's one thing that's bothering you, you're going to want that one thing to leave. You're not going to be projecting that energy out to the land spirits or, your home spirits or your ancestors or anything of that sort. How does a banishment working differ? Hold on. It's a big wall of text. My dyslexia is not being kind today. How does a banishment work? Oh my lord. Be an old lady really quick. How does a banishment working differ from any other working? We got it. I said in the beginning, it can overlap with a cleansing, but banishment is really pushing something away and telling it not to come back. Banishing is the polar opposite of an attraction spell. You're trying to attract money, you're trying to attract friends, trying to attract success or love, you're pulling things in. Banishing is shooing it away. What does it feel like during the banishment? I don't know. I think that will probably differ from person to person. Feel like it's an expansion, like it's kind of like a expansion of like a big sweep of pushing everything that I don't want there. That's how it feels for me. How do you know it was successful? We answered that one. And what tools and materials can be helpful? And we also answered that one. Cool. All right, the next question, how can you be sure that the banishing not only worked, but the entity won't come back? Great question. The entity might come back, and like I said, they're annoying, but the big thing with banishing is after you banish, you need to protect. So after you do the banishing, after you push everything out, set up those protections, renew all of your wards, because then that's pushing somebody out the door, and then your protection is closing the door and locking it. Right? So once you push somebody out the door and you don't close the door, you don't lock it, they're just gonna walk back in. So after you shove the unwanted person out the door, close the door and lock it, protect and ward. But sometimes they do come back. So you're just gonna have to, it's annoying, but Is there a way to banish bad blood in the family? As in, after there have been conversations and now closure from miscommunications within the family, there's still a horrible negative energy. Ooh, I don't know the situation. I think every situation is going to be very, very different. This is more of a letting go spell I think you're looking for. I would look more into cord cutting of grudges. It's hard to banish something when somebody's still holding on to it, right? So if there are people that are holding on to something, I would work more towards a cord cutting. So setting up some kind of thing that represents the person that's holding on to the grudge, and then cutting the cord of whatever grudge or situation or whatever, and doing a cord cutting I think would be better than doing a banishing. Are there different levels to banishing, mild to severe? Yes, we talked about that one. Under what circumstances would you do a milder approach versus a strong one? The urgency and the amount of problems that maybe an entity or a person is giving me.
Hello, everyone.
If I have an annoying coworker and they just irritate me, I'm not going to banish them to a different state, right? Like that's a little extreme just because they talk too much or they're just annoying. Whereas if there's a coworker who is maybe being overlooked despite the fact of having multiple reports to management about harassment of some sort, then maybe you might do something on the new moon and banish them to a different state. Same thing with entities. If it is an entity, because I've had my old apartment, I had a spirit who he just wanted attention and just wanted to let everybody know that he was there. That's it. He just wanted to be like, hey, I'm here. That's it. That's all he wanted. And he'd come by, and sometimes if he felt like he was being forgotten about or something, he would just like open drawers and close them. And I'd be like, okay, hi. And then it would stop. He'd still linger, but never caused any actual problems. It was just kind of like opening the drawers. Like, don't do that. But it worked. He'd open the drawer, and the door, so if somebody was in that drawer or using that drawer and it was open, you couldn't open the door to the doorway or to the hallway. So it was just really annoying. So you'd have to like reach your arm around and like pull the door back a little bit and squish your arm and like push the drawer back, and it was just really annoying. But it wasn't like bad. I never felt the need to banish him. And most of the time with spirits like that, all you have to really do is just ask them to leave. You know, this is my space and I don't feel you comfortable with having you here. I'd really like if you could just leave. It's really not an issue. They're just kind of like, okay. Would you try working up and increasing the severity of a spell if it doesn't work the first time, or is it better to go stronger when in doubt? I think it depends on where you feel. If it's not super dangerous or not super problematic, I usually use smaller things and just kind of like get out and then work it up. But if I am not sure what I'm dealing with, so for example, when I went out to visit Annie, I didn't know what I was going to deal with. I didn't know if I was going to arrive, get a feel for whatever entity had hitched a ride on this table, and just be like, "Ooh, Annie, what'd you bring in here?" You know, I didn't know if it was going to be a huge problem. It just ended up being something that really wasn't that big of a deal, and I brought big guns. It was really overkill for what we needed. I do think that, you know, bigger rituals, they just take a lot of energy. They take a lot of time. So if I don't have to do a big ritual, I won't. How do you identify what it is that needs to be banished? Understanding how to be in tune with energies and spirits, it takes time, it takes practice, but it is important. And, you know, again, it just depends on what you're comfortable with. Some people just aren't comfortable with spirits in their home, and that's okay. That is totally fine. I'm an animist, so I just believe that everything has spirits, so I'm just kind of like, as long as you're not causing me problems, I don't care. For example, I have come into contact with a couple of different kinds of spirits, right? There's the shadow people. They're really fucking creepy, but like they don't cause any problems. They're just uncomfortable. Whereas what I was dealing with Annie, I've dealt with previous, and I call them watchers, and they're just kind of like leeches. They cause stress and paranoia, and they do really, really make the energy feel heavy. Once you meet a specific kind of spirit and you kind of get a gist of like how they work, and again, it just comes with experience. It just sometimes you don't know what you're dealing with, and then after you deal with it, you're like, okay, and then the second time you meet something like that, you're like, oh, okay. So it's a lot of just experience. Yeah, I can't really give you a better answer than that. It's just once you meet a couple of spirits and you kind of get a feel, which is why I think it is really important to interact with the spirits that you do meet safely. But once and most of them, again, they're like people. Most people are not going to have ill intentions for you for no reason, unless, you know, you did something really disrespectful, and maybe you didn't even know it. That was a really long-winded answer. Are there any influences that you would say shaped the way you do banishings, like books, specific rituals, experiences, and how did they affect the way that you do them? Ooh, yes. So a lot of mine is folk-based, so I like to shout. I yell a lot. That's why I like to be a pole instructor, because I like to yell at people. I like to play music. I like to I love the banging of the pots and pans. A lot of folk traditions have shaped my personal workings, and those are just the basic ones. When it comes to bigger ones, I'll use ceremonial stuff, especially if I'm someplace that I don't have my tools. And then the calling of the guardians is a really interesting one that I love using. I think it's a really powerful banishing spell. And then there are some things in that Hecate course that I took from Jason that I think are really interesting. And like I said in some of those videos that I reviewed the course in, I don't use the whole thing that he gave us, but there are really interesting tactics, I suppose, habits. I'll just like feel good to me and what work best for me, and I'll apply them to what I think clicks well. Kind of like if you're cooking in a recipe and you have you are like, oh, I never thought to substitute X for Z, and then you do it, and you're like, oh, this actually kind of works pretty well, and I like this recipe, this like kind of Frankenstein recipe that I've made better. So it's kind of like that. Now that I am learning a little more of like, I guess, in-depth spirit or working with spirits to banish other spirits is something that really changed the way that I do banishing, because it's really, really helpful to have somebody in the spiritual realm to help you with a spiritual realm problem. So that one I think that's a long-winded question too. Next question: what types of entities have you had the most encounters with that may warrant banishing? Did any of them ever require more intense working versus less so? Ooh, I think I think the most common ones that I banish are watchers. They're just so annoying. And the thing too is when they're in your space, they cause so many problems, especially if I'm doing a lot of workings, if I'm doing a lot of like bigger rituals or a lot of workings that I am raising a lot of energy, they just come by like they're just up against the window like little mosquitoes. They're just so annoying. But it feels like they're just standing outside the window, mouth breathing, and like waiting for these wards to come down. And while they're not causing me nightmares or anxiety, they can cause a little bit of paranoia and a lot of, they're just so creepy. So those are really common. They irritate the hell out of me and they're very creepy. And I think a lot of people deal with them without knowing and think that it's a very dangerous entity when really they just feel so uncomfortable. And when you're still learning, when you're still new to a lot of this spirit realm and you're new to feeling all these energies, they are really, really uncomfortable. So I think those are the ones that warrant a banishing most of the time, and they're the most common. Or annoying spirits of the dead. Sometimes I am not a medium. I don't mind, again, I don't mind mingling, but I'm not a medium. I'm not here to exchange messages from the dead to the living. That's just not what I'm here for. I think those two are scary at first when you first encounter them, but then now once you are familiar, you're just like, just go away. You're like, I'm gonna call my ancestors on your ass. Did any of them require more intense? I mean, I have met a few entities that were not fun and did require bigger banishing, but again, it's so rare. It's so rare. Do you take an intuitive approach to how you work your banishings, or do you tend to work with something prefabbed? I take an intuitive approach, as I do with most things. I just feel it out. Kind of building on previous questions, but is there a polite way to banish an energy or spirit? Perhaps it doesn't feel dangerous, but you just want it to leave without making it angry. Especially if you might be in what it considers its space, like if you're renting a home or an apartment. Good question. Yes, there is. So you really can just politely ask it to leave. Most spirits really don't have an issue with leaving. Now, if you are in a space with, like you said, renting an apartment or renting a house, that was kind of like my situation that I touched on before, where there was a spirit in my apartment. I don't know if he was just there or if he felt like it was his space. I really don't know. But my current roommates had already asked him to leave, and they said that he was just like, all right, and then left, which I'm kind of sad about. Like, I liked him. Not the drawer thing, but I liked him. Yeah, some spirits might get upset, and then you might have to be like, okay, actually, like, I do need you to move. And if they escalate it, then you might have to escalate. Another long-winded question. What is the difference between banishing and cleansing? We went through that in the beginning. Is banishing an energy different from banishing an entity? Yes. How do we decide if we need to do a banishing or a simple cleansing will do? I know we should cleanse often, but what about banishing? I think it depends. I would use the word cleansing and banishing interchangeably when it comes to energy itself. There was a huge argument in a room, and it was nasty, and the energies just gross. And you want to banish that energy. You want to banish that gross, heavy feeling. Whereas when it comes to entities, I feel like that's more of banishing. The heavier it is, I would consider it more on the banishing side. Cleansing is more just kind of like work. There's so many banishing oils, herbs, candles, and other tools. How do you know which will work best in each situation? That's such a good question. Try checking out this video. I talk about spell ingredients and kind of the importance of understanding the energies and why you're working with a very specific ingredient. And it just comes down to what works best for you too, because some people love banishing oils over herbs, or candles over sprays, or ceremonies over banging pots and pans. You know, it really just depends on what you feel works the best. I've got a freezer spell that I did a week ago with a selfish ass neighbor above me who wakes me up late at night regularly, and I'm seeing some positive results. So a freezer spell is not a banishing spell. It's a freezer spell. And a freezer spell is, I've just hit the pause button, right? It's a pause button. A freezer spell is not something that I would ever suggest as a permanent fix. Definitely, a freezer spell is something to be like, okay, stop your shit for just a second so I can think and actually figure out a real solution on how to fix this situation. So do not leave them in the freezer spell for way too long. I would say maximum 3 months. Like that's kind of pushing it. But maybe I think with a neighbor, with people, like with living people, situations always get sticky and always complicated. So again, I don't know the situation. I would have to know the situation in depth in order to confidently give you what I would prescribe magically. As always, you want to work magic and the mundane simultaneously and work together. So when you are working with something like a noisy neighbor or an asshole of a neighbor, right, maybe try a sweetening spell. Maybe try sweetening them because maybe they're in a terrible situation in their life and maybe they're just not emotionally intelligent on how to not project that onto other people. You know, you don't ever really know the other person's situation as well. So try a sweetening spell also while they're in the freezer, mundane and magical together. Don't, if you're doing a sweetening spell, be sweet to them. Have you ever asked a spirit or entity you plan to banish them? Oh, you plan to banish and why they are there. Not just what their purpose is, but the motivation. I know that watchers can be uncomfortable and they aren't inherently evil or bad. Why were they watching? Oh, that's such a good question. So like I previously said, watchers are kind of like spiritual leeches, which in turn makes everything super heavy and causes the paranoia. And their presence is just gross. So, yeah, they're watching because, I call them watchers because they don't touch you. They don't do anything to you physically, but they do cause a lot of negative symptoms. And the reason I call them watchers is because they feel like they are just standing there, like breathing, watching. I've never really asked like why they're there. Again, I'm not a medium. I don't feel the responsibility to pass messages from spirits or the dead to the living. Maybe once in a blue moon, but most of the time the messages are for me, so I don't really have to talk to, it's just my ancestors and me just shooting the shit. And whereas I'm not a medium. I'm not here to be the mediator for them. So no, most of the time if they're in here and they're causing problems, I'm just like, not in my house, not on my Christian Minecraft server. Get out. Next one. What is in your go-to banishing toolkit? You don't mind sharing, that is. I use things intuitively, especially for workings like this, because sometimes you don't know what you'll need until you get there. But what are the diehards that are your must-haves? And I would love some book recommendations if you have any. So I gave you the book recommendations. My diehards, guava leaves. Those things are like a kick in the ass. And again, they smell awful when you burn them. So I only use them when I need to use them. But they are potent, at least that's my experience. Cloves. I love cloves. Again, my simple banishings that I like to use is juniper and cedar. I like those just as a regular cleansing banishing. But my go-to, guava leaves, cloves, and if I need to bring out bigger, heavier things, I would use the Guardians, the Calling of the Guardians, that Jason Miller has in his Protection and Reversal book. And then my ancestors, man, I call them, or I like to work with whatever spirits are around me, like the land spirits especially. They don't fuck around. How do you make sure the entity won't come back after banishing? What do you do if it comes back? And what to do if the entity will be ready for another banishing and protect itself in some way? Also, could you tell us more about the Watcher? Ooh, okay, so sometimes, like I said, some entities are just dicks. They just come back and they're annoying. And it doesn't happen often. It's, like I said, equate it to people, right? Like most people, when you tell them like, hey, I blocked you on everything, I don't want to talk to you. Most of them, yeah, they'll be like, that was rude. The only thing that I could think of is if somebody sent you an entity, then maybe they'll be a little more persistent. Or if this entity is just a dick, and sometimes you meet those. Just sometimes you do. And it's not that, like come back guns blazing or anything. This is talking on more of the level 8 to 10 side. If they keep coming back, that's persistence, and if it's bad, get a professional. Otherwise, it might just have to be an over and over thing of just like get the hell out, and then stronger wards, because the stronger your wards are, the harder it's going to be for them to get in. The more layers of wards you have as well, very helpful. Can a banishing spell / ritual backfire? What happens if you fall short and the ritual wasn't enough? Okay, so the first question, see, backfire is a weird word because I think it's more so, most of the time when spells backfire, it's more of the spell worked, just not in the way that you thought was going to. So it was more of you understanding where you left holes and learning for next time. Yes, it's a backfire, but the spell worked. As shitty as that is, the spell worked, just not in the way, you weren't specific. The only way that I can think of is if you are working it on a person and it just doesn't work out the way that you thought. So, if you're banishing somebody from your life is very complicated. So if you're not specific enough and you don't kind of set up all the dominoes correctly to fall in the way that you want to fall, the spell is just going to find a way. Really only in that situation with a person, not so much entities. Entities are a little easier, in my opinion. What happens if you fall short and the ritual wasn't enough? Then they just won't go. They just won't leave. You just got to come back with something a little bigger. Moreover, what happens when the entity knows you and knows what you're trying to do? I think what you're describing and what you're thinking about is more on the level 8, 9, 10 type of thing. Also, what do you do when one of these things is acting as one of your ancestors for a long time? Get it out and ask your ancestors to push that out, because I'm sure that's really disrespectful of them. My ancestors would be pissed. Some have already asked, do you try talking to them? How do you know when you need to banish them? And any clue where they go? So we answered the first two. Do you have any clue where they go? No. And I don't care. If you're causing me issues, if your spirit is causing me issues, I just don't want you around me or the people. Get out. I don't care where you go, just don't be here. I have this small, tiny, minute little section of the world and of the universe. You can go literally anywhere else. Does banishing with more or just as strong with just yourself? The more people, the better. Just because it's kind of like having more batteries, right? More generators. It's just more of, if each person knows how to direct their energy, it's going to be a lot better to work with those people. Banishing 101, honestly. I'm curious on how you got started. The second question about the difference between cleansing and banishing. Like in banishing, that's just like a part of practicing, I think, is kind of just how I got started. I think that was the question. I'm sorry if that wasn't. And then banishing and cleansing, the difference, we covered that as well. What was the big surprise or the big guns that you bought to this banishing ceremony mentioned in the video? What was the banishing ritual and where did you learn it? The big guns, it was just overkill. It was just a watcher. I'd probably classify a watcher like 4, 5, depending on what kind of watcher, because there are some that are just kind of like leeches, and there's some that are a little more like sentient. It's kind of overkill. Like, I think I brought a banishing ritual for something of the level of like 7 or 8. I was like, get out. The ritual that we used, like I said, is just an accumulation of things that I've learned and things that work well for me, years of experience and learning from different things that I kind of just put all together. What do you do if a banishment goes wrong? I.e., you banish something and realize, whoops, I have banished that. How would you go about undoing your mistake? I don't think that's ever happened. Like, I'm sure I've banished things out of fear. Like, you know, I may have not known what I was dealing with, and it was just more of an intense feeling energy or an intense feeling spirit, and not anything inherently like bad or evil. I don't think I've ever done that, actually. That's a really good question, though. Last person. Could you give advice on banishing negative spiritual attachments and entities? How to recognize that you have an attachment and how to banish them safely? Spirits like to attach themselves to people or things sometimes for a plethora of reasons. Again, it just depends on if you're comfortable with this thing being attached to whatever thing or person or whatever. Personally, I don't really like spirits being attached to me unless they are part of my spiritual team, like my ancestors, for example. You know, like, they're probably going to be attached to me. But if it's just some rando that passed by and was like, yeah, that's cool energy, and I'm like, who are you? Then yeah, you're gonna get the hell off me. I would do a cleansing of the person or the space or the thing first, and then do a banishing. So first you would want to disconnect the spirit from whatever it's connected to, and then banish the spirit itself. Let's see, I think that's all the questions. Oh wait, do you have any personal experiences with negative entity attachment? I've definitely had entities that will attach to me, and that's kind of just something that, you know, being a practitioner, if you don't have your wards up, or especially, oh man, when I was a new practitioner, and I didn't wear any, very subtle, small protections can make the world of difference. It's wild. That is all. That's it. We've covered all of the questions. If you have any other questions, leave them down in the comments below. This community is wonderful, and they like to help each other out, and most likely if you have that question, somebody else has that question. You can also check out the Discord that's linked down below. People are super helpful in that Discord. It's a really good, helpful community. But that is all for this video. I really hope that you enjoyed. I hope that this helped, and I hope that you feel a little more confident or have a better understanding of banishing. And like I said, I don't want this to be like a scary topic. I want it to be something that you're comfortable with and that you eventually feel comfortable to just do. I don't want the spirit realm to scare you, because it's not for everybody. It's, you know, it can be uncomfortable. I totally get it, and it can be scary, but I don't want it to scare you. I don't want it to be something that is stunting your growth as a practitioner. What's that quote? A witch should never be fearful walking alone in the forest, because the witch should know that they are the most dangerous thing in the trees. It's something along those lines. But it's a powerful one. Knowledge is power. Put it to practice. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Best of luck. Be kind to each other, and may your gods treat you as you've treated others.